The rain felt like needles against my face as I stood at the rusted gate of what used to be my home. My father shoved a worn duffel bag into my chest with enough force to make me stumble backward. "If you want to be an adult, Aaron, figure life out on your own," he said, his voice cutting through the storm like a blade. My mother stood behind him in the doorway, arms crossed, face turned away. The door slammed. The lock clicked. That sound, that final metallic snap, echoed louder than any thunder that night. I was drenched within seconds, trembling from both cold and the sharp sting of disbelief. I clutched the bag tighter, feeling its weight but not its contents. 17 years of my life had just ended in a single sentence. I wanted to scream, to bang on the door, to beg them to reconsider. But something inside me stayed quiet. Maybe it was shock. Maybe it was pride. Or maybe, deep down, I already knew that begging wouldn't change their minds. They had made their choice. Now I had to make mine. I stumbled through the downpour into the nearest alley, my shoes squelching with every step. The streetlights flickered weakly, casting long shadows that swallowed me whole. I found a covered spot beneath a broken awning and dropped to the wet concrete, my back against the cold brick wall. With shaking hands, I unzipped the duffel bag. Inside were torn clothes I hadn't worn in years, a single photo of me as a child, and nothing else. No money, no food, no note, just silence wrapped in fabric. I stared at the photo, rain dripping from my hair onto the creased paper. The boy in the picture smiled like he believed the world was kind. I whispered into the empty alley. They told me to figure life out alone. A passing bus roared by, splashing dirty water over the curb and soaking me further. I didn't move. I just sat there, watching the last piece of my childhood wash away into the gutter. That was the night I learned that family isn't always shelter. My name is Aaron, and I learned early that love can disappear faster than lightning. Before that rainy night, I had been the kid who fixed bicycles for the neighborhood children. I never asked for payment, just the chance to see them smile when their wheels spun freely again. I was the one who helped old Mr. Tobias carry his groceries up 3 flights of stairs every Sunday. I was the quiet helper, the invisible boy who existed in the margins of other people's stories. My parents never understood why I gave so much when we had so little. My father called it foolishness. My mother called it wasted time. But to me, it felt right. Felt like the person I wanted to be. I had no idea then that those small acts would one day become the foundation of something far greater than I could imagine. But that night, soaked and abandoned, I wasn't thinking about the future. I was just trying to survive the present. By the next morning, hunger gnawed at my stomach like a living thing. I wandered the streets until I found a small bakery tucked between 2 larger buildings. The owner, a round man with flour dusted on his apron, was setting out fresh loaves in the window. I watched from across the street, mouth-watering, knowing I couldn't afford even a single roll. That's when I noticed the alley behind the shop. It was cluttered with empty boxes and scattered trash. Without thinking, I crossed the street, picked up a discarded broom leaning against the wall, and started sweeping. I worked quietly, methodically, clearing the debris and stacking the boxes neatly. When I finished, the alley looked almost respectable. I left before anyone could see me. The next morning, I returned and did it again. On the 3rd day, I found a small paper bag sitting on one of the crates. Inside were 2 slightly stale rolls and a bruised apple. No note, no explanation. I ate slowly, savoring every bite, and whispered a quiet thank you to whoever had left it. Weeks passed in that strange rhythm. I swept the alley at dawn, and food appeared in return. I never saw the baker acknowledge me directly, but I knew he understood. Then, one cold morning, something different waited for me. Resting on the wooden crate where I usually sat was a chipped teacup filled with steaming tea. The warmth rising from it looked almost magical in the dim light. I glanced around the empty alley, searching for whoever had left it. No one, just shadows and the distant hum of the waking city. I picked up the cup carefully, wrapping my cold fingers around it, and took a slow sip. It was bitter and sweet at the same time, the kind of tea that tasted like care. From that day forward, The tea appeared every morning, always hot, always waiting. I never learned who left it, but I whispered my thanks each time, hoping the words would somehow reach them. That cup became more than just tea. It became proof that someone still saw me.
I wasn't the only one living in the cracks of the city. There was Kyler, a boy about my age who shined shoes near the market square. His hands were always stained black from polish, but his grin was bright and genuine. Then there was Runa, an old woman who sold wilted flowers from a cart with wobbly wheels. She hummed old songs while she worked, melodies that sounded like they came from another lifetime. We never spoke much at first, just exchanged nods and tired smiles. But slowly, we became something like family. When I had extra bread, I shared it with Kyler. When Runa's cart broke down, Kyler and I helped fix it with wire and prayers. We were poor, forgotten, invisible to most people. But to each other, we mattered. We existed. One evening, as we sat together in the fading light, Kyler asked me, "Why do you give when you have so little?" I thought about it for a moment, then shrugged. "Because someone gave to me," I said simply. "And maybe that's how the world gets better." While teaching Kyler to read using old newspapers we scavenged from trash bins, I noticed someone watching us. A man in worn clothes stood at the corner of the alley, partially hidden in shadow. His face was weathered, his posture bent, but his eyes were sharp and alert. He didn't approach, didn't speak, just observed. I felt his gaze like a weight. When I glanced up and caught his eye, I raised my hand in a polite wave. He nodded once, slowly, then turned and walked away. "Who was that?" Kyler asked, squinting toward the empty corner. "I don't know," I admitted. But something about those eyes felt familiar, like I should know him. Over the following weeks, I saw him again and again. Always at a distance. Always watching. Never interfering. Runa noticed too. "That man's been around for years," she said one afternoon. "Never buys anything. Never talks. Just watches." I didn't know what to make of it, but I didn't feel threatened. If anything, I felt seen. And sometimes, being seen is enough. One afternoon, while helping the baker carry flour sacks from a delivery truck, a businessman in a pressed suit rushed past and dropped his leather wallet. It hit the ground with a heavy thud, coins spilling across the pavement. I picked it up and called after him, but he didn't hear me. I could have kept it. No one would have known. Inside were crisp bills, credit cards, identification. Enough money to eat well for weeks. But I didn't even consider it. I chased him down the street until I caught up, breathless, and handed it over. The man stared at me like I'd just spoken a foreign language. "You're returning it?" he asked, suspicion and surprise mixing in his tone. "Of course," I said. He laughed, but it was a bitter sound. "You're the first person who ever brought it back." He pressed a coin into my palm before walking away, not as payment, but as something else. A test, maybe. Or a thank you. Later that evening, I gave that coin to Runa, who hadn't eaten lunch because she couldn't afford it. The next morning, the teacup was gone. I stood in the alley, staring at the empty crate, confusion twisting in my chest. I waited, thinking maybe I was just early. Minutes passed. Then an hour. The shutters of the bakery remained closed, the windows dark. The alley felt eerily quiet, like the city itself was holding its breath. I swept anyway, slower this time, my mind racing with questions. Had I done something wrong? Had the person who left the tea grown tired of me? Or had something happened to them? The silence pressed down on me, heavier than any rain. Kyler found me sitting there at noon, still waiting. "You okay?" he asked. I shook my head. "The tea's gone." He didn't laugh or dismiss it. He just sat down beside me, and we waited together until dusk painted the sky orange and gray. But the cup never came. That night, I felt more alone than I had since the door first slammed shut. At dusk, as I prepared to leave, I noticed something tucked beneath the crate. A folded piece of paper, yellowed and fragile. My hands trembled as I unfolded it. The handwriting was old-fashioned, shaky, like it had been written by someone fighting against time. It said only, "Keep doing what's right. Someone is always watching." At the bottom, pressed into the paper in faded red wax, was a family crest. It was elegant, intricate, the kind of symbol that belonged to old money and older names. I traced the outline with my finger, trying to understand what it meant. Who had left this? Why now? And why me? I folded the note carefully and tucked it into my pocket, close to my heart. That night, I dreamed of eyes in the shadows, of hands placing a cup of tea in the dark, of someone who saw me when no one else did. I didn't understand it yet, but I felt it. Something was beginning. Something bigger than survival. The next morning, Kyler came running into the alley, out of breath and wide-eyed. "Aaron," he gasped, bending over to catch his breath. "The old man. The one who used to buy books near the market." He collapsed. My stomach dropped. What old man? But even as I asked, I already knew. The Watcher. The one with the sharp, familiar eyes. "They took him to the hospital," Kyler continued. "But people are saying he didn't make it." I felt something crack inside me, a loss I couldn't name because I'd never even spoken to him. But I knew somehow that he mattered. That he had been part of my life in ways I hadn't understood. I asked Kyler to take me to where it happened. We stood in the market square, staring at the spot where he'd fallen. Vendors whispered around us, sharing rumors and half-stories. No one knew his name. No one knew where he'd come from. He was just another forgotten soul. But I couldn't forget him. Not now. A few days later, I attended a small funeral service held in a quiet corner of the city. There were no family members, no grand speeches, just a handful of vendors and a lawyer reading a short will. I stood at the back, unsure if I even belonged there. The lawyer was a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses, his voice calm and formal as he spoke about the deceased's wishes. He mentioned donations to local charities, small bequests to people who had shown him kindness. I listened, my heart heavy with a grief I didn't fully understand. When the service ended, I lingered near the grave, staring at the simple headstone. No name, just a date and a carved symbol. The same family crest from the note. I felt a pull, something deep and inexplicable, as if I'd lost someone I'd never properly met. As I turned to leave, the lawyer approached me. "Are you Aaron?" he asked. I nodded, startled. "He mentioned you," the man said softly. "More than once." Days passed in a haze. I kept sweeping the alley, kept helping Runa and Kyler, but my mind was elsewhere. Then, one afternoon, the lawyer returned. He appeared at the entrance of the alley, dressed in a gray suit that looked out of place among the trash bins and broken crates. "Are you Aaron, the boy who cleans this place?" he asked. "Yes," I said cautiously. He handed me a thick envelope sealed with red wax. The same crest. My hands shook as I took it. "What is this?" "An invitation," he replied. "And an inheritance." I stared at him, uncomprehending. "I think you have the wrong person." He smiled faintly. "Open it when you're ready. The address is inside. He wanted you to see what you've earned." Before I could ask more, he turned and walked away, leaving me standing there with the envelope clutched in my hands. That night, I finally broke the seal. Inside was a letter, written in the same shaky handwriting as the note. It began, "To the boy who swept the alley." The letter gave me directions to a place on the outskirts of the city, far beyond the streets I knew. I packed my few belongings, told Kyler and Runa I'd be back soon, and began walking. The road wound through quiet trees and rolling hills, the kind of landscape I'd only seen in pictures. Each step felt heavier, not from exhaustion but from anticipation. What was waiting for me? Why had this stranger chosen me? The questions spun in my mind like leaves in wind. After hours of walking, the path narrowed and the trees grew denser. Just when I thought I might have taken a wrong turn, I saw it. At the end of the path stood an old estate, its windows covered in ivy, its iron gates half open as if waiting. The sight took my breath away. A caretaker, an older woman with kind eyes, greeted me at the entrance. "You're Aaron," she said, not as a question but as a fact. "He spoke of you often, sir." I swallowed hard. Who was he? She led me through the gates and into the house. The air inside smelled of aged paper, ink, and something floral I couldn't name. Books were stacked floor to ceiling, their spines worn and faded. Photographs lined the walls, pictures of markets, alleys, street corners. My alley. My heart pounded as I followed her deeper into the house. We entered a study, and the caretaker gestured toward a large wooden desk near the window. On it sat a leather-bound journal, its cover embossed with gold lettering. My name. He left this for you, she said quietly before slipping out of the room. I approached the desk slowly, almost afraid to touch it. When I finally picked up the journal, it felt warm, as if it had been held recently. I opened the first page. The handwriting was unmistakable. It read, "This is the record of a life worth remembering. Not mine. Yours." I sank into the chair, hands trembling, and began to read. Each page detailed acts of kindness I'd performed, moments I'd already forgotten but someone had recorded. The journal was meticulous. Every act, no matter how small, had been documented. The wallet I returned. The alley I swept. The bread I shared with Kyla. The cart I helped Runa fix. Page after page, my life unfolded in someone else's careful handwriting. Each entry was signed with initials I didn't recognize but felt connected to. At the bottom of each page was a single phrase, kindness observed. Kindness honored. Tears blurred my vision as I turned the pages. I hadn't realized anyone was watching. I hadn't done these things for recognition or reward. I'd done them because they felt right. But someone had seen. Someone had cared enough to write it all down. Near the end of the journal, the handwriting grew shakier, the letters harder to read. The final entry was dated just days before the funeral. It said, "I have watched this boy become a man. Not through wealth or power, but through quiet acts of grace. He deserves more than survival. He deserves legacy." I was still sitting at the desk, staring at the journal, when the lawyer entered the room. He carried a folder thick with documents and wore the expression of someone about to deliver life-changing news. By his final wish, he began, setting the folder on the desk, "Everything here belongs to you. The estate, the foundation he built, the accounts he maintained. All of it." I couldn't breathe. The words didn't make sense. "Why?" I managed to ask. The lawyer smiled sadly. He said kindness should never die poor. He explained that the man had been a reclusive philanthropist, the last of an old family with no living heirs. He had spent years observing people, searching for someone worthy of carrying on his work. And somehow, inexplicably, he had chosen me. He believed you would use it wisely, the lawyer said. Not for yourself, but for others. I sat in stunned silence, overwhelmed by the weight of it. This wasn't just money. It was responsibility. It was trust. It was everything. The lawyer left me alone with the documents, and I spent hours reading through them. Bank statements. Property deeds. Letters of intent. The foundation had been funding schools, shelters, and small businesses for decades, all anonymously. And now, it was mine to continue. I thought about Kyler and Runa, about the alley where I'd learned to survive. I thought about the teacup and the quiet acts of care that had kept me going. And I realized something profound. This wasn't a gift. It was a continuation. The man who had watched me hadn't just given me wealth. He'd given me purpose. Over the following weeks, I moved into the estate and began learning how the foundation operated. The caretaker, whose name was Isla, helped me navigate the complexities. He was a very private man, she told me one evening. But he loved watching people from a distance. He said it was the only way to see who they truly were. I understood that now. He had seen me at my lowest and chosen to believe in me anyway. I returned to the city after a month, but I wasn't the same person who had left. I wore clean clothes now, carried myself with quiet composure, but my eyes hadn't changed. I was still the boy who swept alleys and shared bread, just with more resources. Anonymously, I funded the repair of the bakery, the restoration of the alley, and scholarships for every child who had once slept on those streets. I hired Kyler to manage a new community center and gave Runa a permanent stall in a renovated market. They didn't know I was behind it. Not yet. I wanted to do it the way the old man had done it for me. Quietly. Without expectation. One afternoon, while visiting a charity kitchen I now supported, I saw two frail figures standing in the food line. My breath caught. It was them. My parents. Their clothes were torn, their faces hollowed by hardship. My mother's hands trembled as she accepted a tray. My father stared at the floor, pride stripped away by necessity. I watched from a distance, emotions warring inside me. They didn't recognize me. Why would they? The boy they'd thrown out had been broken and desperate. The man standing before them now was clean, composed, successful. I approached slowly, my heart pounding. "Excuse me," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "Are you looking for work?" My father glanced up, suspicion flickering in his tired eyes. "We're just here for food," he said quietly. "I'm not offering charity," I replied. "I'm offering work. Honest work. If you're interested." My mother studied me, searching for something familiar but not finding it. "What kind of work?" "Restoration," I said. "An alley that once gave someone a second chance. It needs people who understand the value of rebuilding." They exchanged glances, desperation winning over pride. "We'll take it," my father said. I nodded and handed them a card with an address. "Report there tomorrow morning. Early." As they walked away, clutching the card like a lifeline, I felt something shift inside me. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But something close to understanding. The next morning, I watched from a distance as my parents arrived at the old bakery alley. It had been transformed. The walls were painted, flowers bloomed in boxes along the fence, and a bronze plaque hung near the entrance. It read, "In memory of the kindness that began here. Aaron's Foundation." My mother's hand flew to her mouth. My father's legs seemed to give out, and he sank to his knees on the cobblestones. They knew. Finally, they understood. I stepped forward, my footsteps echoing in the quiet morning. They turned, and for the first time in years, we stood face to face. Not as family. Not yet. But as people who shared a history. "You," my father whispered, his voice breaking. "It's you." I nodded slowly. My mother reached toward me, then stopped, unsure if she had the right. "Aaron, we..." "Don't," I said gently but firmly. "Don't apologize yet. Just listen." I told them about the alley, the tea, the journal. I told them how I'd survived and who had helped me. I watched their faces crumble with regret. "We don't deserve your forgiveness," my father said, tears streaming down his weathered face. "We threw you away like you were nothing." I looked at him, at the man who had once seemed so strong and certain. Now he just looked tired and broken. "I didn't do this to forgive you," I said quietly. "I did this so no one else would have to learn love the hard way." I handed them each an apron, simple and clean. "This is your second chance. Not money. Not pity. Just honest work and a place to start over." My mother took the apron with shaking hands. "Why would you help us after what we did?" I thought about the teacup, the journal, the man who had seen me when no one else did. "Because someone once helped me when they didn't have to," I said. "And maybe that's how broken things get fixed. One act of kindness at a time." They didn't hug me. I wasn't ready for that, and neither were they. But they put on the aprons and started working. Over the following months, my parents worked in the alley, cleaning, painting, helping. I watched them from a distance, the way the old man had once watched me. Slowly, I saw them change. The arrogance faded. The shame remained, but it was joined by something else. Humility. Purpose. One evening, my mother approached me as I was reviewing foundation documents in the small office we'd set up. "Can I talk to you?" she asked hesitantly. I gestured to the chair across from my desk. She sat down, wringing her hands. "I know we can never make up for what we did," she began, her voice thick with emotion. "But I want you to know that watching you build all this, seeing the person you became despite us, I'm so sorry we weren't there for it." I set down my pen and met her eyes. "I'm not the same person you threw out," I said. "That boy died in the rain. But maybe that was necessary. Maybe I had to lose everything to find out who I really was." My father joined us a few minutes later, dust on his clothes from working on the building's facade. He looked between us, sensing the weight in the room. "We were wrong," he said simply. "And we'll spend the rest of our lives trying to be better." I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the alley that had saved me. "I'm not doing this for redemption," I said, more to myself than to them. "I'm doing this because the world showed me that kindness matters. That one person paying attention can change everything." I turned back to face them. "You don't owe me anything. But you owe it to yourselves to be better. Not for me. For you." They both nodded, and I saw something in their faces I'd never seen before. Genuine remorse. Real determination to change. It wasn't forgiveness yet, but it was a beginning. And sometimes, beginnings are enough. We worked together in silence after that, three people bound by history but building towards something new. The story closes at dawn, years later, just as it began. I stand in the same alley with a broom in my hand, but everything else has changed. Children play nearby, their laughter echoing off walls that were once cold and empty. The bakery thrives, employing people who once had nowhere to go. The foundation has grown, touching lives across the city in ways I never imagined. My parents work alongside me now, not as penants but as partners. We've built something together. Not a family in the traditional sense, but something real nonetheless. Kyla runs 3 community centers. Runa teaches flower arranging to young artists. The alley that once represented my lowest point has become a symbol of hope. I think about the old man often, wondering if he knew how far his quiet kindness would reach. I think he did. That's why he chose me. Not because I was special, but because I understood that small acts matter. As the sun rises, casting golden light across the cobblestones, I whisper the same words I used to say to the teacup. Thank you. And somewhere, I believe he hears me. They told me to figure out life alone. But life, I learned, figures itself out through kindness. 1 cup of tea. 1 swept alley. 1 second chance at a time.